This debate is about whether evolution is or is not a fact. As soon as I discovered that this was the topic of the debate, I immediately became worried that it would get bogged down in semantics, because AronRa and Subboor Ahamad came to the debate with different definitions of what a fact is. I'll try to focus on some of the more substantive arguments.
Now, somebody can come along and say, wait, Darwinian evolution has been so successful, it's given us so many predictions which have been confirmed, it's got to be true. Well, just here at the University of Texas, we have the philosopher of science, Larry Loden, and he's put together a philosophical paper where he puts together 30 scientific theories which were empirically quite successful, but which turned out to be false. And this is a well-known, understood thing in the philosophy of science. No matter how successful a theory is, it doesn't mean it won't change. It doesn't mean it is a fact in the absolute sense. Now, this is what it says in the philosophy of science, a very short introduction again by Oxford University. Historically, there are many cases of theories that we now believe to be false that were empirically quite successful. So clearly, no matter how successful a theory is, it doesn't mean you can call it an absolute.
Evolution is as firmly established as any other idea in the empirical sciences. The fact that it is not absolute is not a limitation to the theory of evolution per se. Rather, it is a limitation of the empirical sciences generally. Ahamad uses a philosophical definition of the word fact that effectively excludes all propositions based in the empirical sciences from factuality.
And it's also very important at this moment to define the difference between Darwinian evolution and evolution. Evolution simply is an observation of biological change. From that perspective, it is an absolute.
It's more specific than that. Currently, the scientific concept of evolution is change which relates to mutation and natural selection. It does not include non-genetic changes or mechanisms that were once hypothesized but have since been abandoned.
We know that bacteria mutates. This is a clear-cut evolution observation. We have observed this in the lab. Now, because that is true, does that mean the tree of life is true? Does that mean natural selection working on variations is the cause behind all that?
Not necessarily, but it's the best corroborated inference. Even if it isn't absolute, it is superior to all other hypotheses in this respect.
Now, why is Darwinian evolution speculative? For two reasons. Number one is reconstructing the evolutionary history of life on Earth is very difficult. Number one, we're speaking about something that has taken place over an incredibly long period of time, something like 4 billion years. Now, it's very difficult to try and reconstruct something that happened that long ago. And in the Journal of Theoretical Biology, there's a paper called Testing the Hypothesis of Common Ancestry. There's actually a section dedicated to why it's difficult to work out what happened in the past, and that's actually what they conclude.
All ideas about the development of the diversity of life we see today are speculative in this sense. The difference between the idea of common ancestry and all other ideas about why the planet has such diversity of life is that common ancestry is better corroborated than all other ideas. I presume this guy is some kind of creationist. Even if the prevailing concept of evolution is speculative, ought we believe in creationism instead? Creationism is even more speculative because it isn't even inferred from the fossil evidence or genetic evidence, and it isn't nearly as corroborated as the prevailing conception of evolution. But perhaps Ahamad would just say, I don't know, when there is a dearth of evidence for all hypotheses about a given question and belief in none of them is warranted. I don't know is the best position to take. However, even though the idea of evolution is not absolute, there is far from a dearth of evidence in its favor. There is more than enough to warrant belief in it.
Okay, it's like trying to work out the plot of Leo Tolstoy's War and Peace, and this is not it, by the way, with 13 randomly selected pages, right? Now imagine if you had that book. How many different plots, theories, ideas could you put together if you only had 13 randomly selected pages and all the rest of the pages were missing? Multiple. So why is it that we're sometimes told by people who should know better that the Darwinian picture is the only inference possible?
I don't know who told you that it's the only inference possible. There are plenty of other possible inferences. The idea that evolution was guided by extraterrestrials is a possible inference. What is special about the currently accepted theory of evolution is that it is the most parsimonious and best corroborated inference we have so far been able to make, and therefore it's the inference most likely to be correct.
That Darwinian evolution is contrasted against Lamarckian evolution, based on the mechanisms that Darwin first proposed and which has since been confirmed. And Subboor has already conceded that these are a matter of actual fact. In the American understanding of that word, Lamarck's theory couldn't pass the test, but Darwin's did. and was replaced by Darwinian theory, which was then synthesized with genetic theory to become the modern synthesis. The Mendelo-Darwinian synthesis is also called Neo-Darwinism, and is distinguished from Darwinism being limited to Darwin's own 19th century understanding. So when he says the word Darwinism, to me, I'm hearing what they knew in the 1800s, and nothing more than that. So, Subboor does not want to accept that additional mechanisms have been discovered and integrated. He talks about there being completely new theories that are supposed to challenge the original theory. No, these are new theories that are being integrated with the original mechanisms.
Ahamad accepts evolution when it is plainly observable, but says that Darwinism is the idea of common ancestry, which is not observable and therefore speculative.
He said that evolution is something that is not controversial because it is limited to observable changes within a single species that can be seen in one lifetime. But he says that Darwinism is a history of biodiversity from a universal common ancestor that takes millions or billions of years. So what he's done, although he doesn't seem to realize this yet, is he has conflated evolution with microevolution and Darwinism with macroevolution.
Even though a lot of evolutionary development is not observable, is it not entirely reasonable to infer that larger changes are an extension of the clearly visible smaller changes? Sure, it isn't necessarily true, but it is a very strong inductive inference that has been corroborated by virtually every piece of evidence relevant to it.
Now, he didn't call it macroevolution, which would have been easy to disprove, just pull up a documented speciation. But since he's using the wrong definitions for the wrong terms, it gets vague and hard to identify exactly what he thinks he's talking about.
Even some macroevolution, the development of new species, has been directly observed. In the description there's a link to my Patreon for you generous and kind-hearted folk.